Can you imagine that one of the most successful pilots in the history of F1, on his second chance with a new team, see his return eliminated by a simple violation of track limits and with it drag a whole weekend to ruin? What exactly failed in Spa with Lewis Hamilton? Today you will discover it. On Saturday of the 2025 Belgian Grand Prix, he was loaded with expectation. Spa-Francorchamps, an iconic circuit with always unpredictable conditions, was the perfect setting for Lewis Hamilton to demonstrate that his adaptation to the Ferrari team could begin to consolidate. It came from a seasonal start of nuances, but this weekend had a key opportunity. The update package promised performance, and the technical conditions of the circuit played in favor of their aggressive and clean style. However, nothing came out as planned. It all started in Saturday's classification, in the dreaded Curve 4 of the circuit, known as Rydillen. In a lap that seemed fast, aggressive, and perfectly measured, Hamilton's SF25 crossed the white line that delimits the legal layout with the 4 white line. This action, imperceptible to the human eye in real time, was detected by the outer chambers installed by the FIA. It was not the onboard cameras that determined the infraction. These, in fact, did not offer total clarity. It was the external analysis that confirmed the full exit of the car beyond the track limits, and with it, the disqualification of the return. On a track as long as Spa, losing an attempt is practically losing the session, and even more so if it is a return launched in Q1. The most disturbing of this moment was not only the invalidation itself, but the emotional context that was generated. Hamilton, still in the car, began to suspect that something was not going well when his engineer, Riccardo Adami, did not respond with the usual speed. In a routine in which communication is almost instinctive, silence was the first indication that the return would not be valid. Hamilton asked with tension, "Is everything right?" waiting for a confirmation of a good weather or at least one technical comment. But the answer he received was brutal in his coldness. Track limits in Curve 4. The return time has been eliminated. That moment captured by the radio was much more than an anecdote. It was a public demonstration of a deep problem. The coldness of the response, the absence of an immediate detailed explanation, and the fact that Hamilton learned of the radio, without a proactive intervention of Ferrari to warn him of the possible risk before close return, showed a worrying disconnection between pilot and wall. This infraction marked the first elimination of Hamilton in Q1 since it arrived in Ferrari, and not due to lack of pure rhythm, but for a millimeter penalty that could have been avoided with a better planning or warning by the team. In Formula 1, details are everything. And when a Hamilton-caliber pilot, 7 times world champion, falls eliminated by such a small but expensive mistake, you can't simply talk about bad luck. What seemed like an isolated incident became the trigger for a catastrophic weekend. That eliminated turn not only conditioned its exit position, but also sowed doubts about Ferrari's technical leadership, the quality of feedback that the pilot receives, and the strategic cohesion of the team. What should be a validation day of the new technical package of the SF25 ended up being the first domino tab in a chain of errors, tensions, and frustrations that would drag for the rest of the weekend. Saturday's mistake was not an anomaly. It was only the visible surface of a crack that was already growing inside Ferrari. Lewis Hamilton, in his new stage with the Scuderia, had been dragging from his debut clear signs that the project was not functioning as expected. The 2025 Belgian Grand Prix acted as a catalyst, but the discomfort had been accumulating from the preseason tests. With each disputed session, with each batch analyzed in the telemetry data, with each conversation between engineers that seemed not to reach any clear conclusion. During that same weekend, Hamilton not only suffered the elimination of Saturday. On Friday, in the classification for the sprint race, he had already starred in a disconcerting episode. In the last chicane, about to close his quick lap, the SF25 lost control unexpectedly. The car made a violent spin and immediate speculation began. From brake problems to a possible failure in the traction control system. But after an exhaustive analysis, the team ruled out any mechanical failure. The conclusion was devastating for the pride of an elite pilot as Hamilton. It was a driving error. This decision, communicated without anesthesia by Ferrari's technical environment, made it clear that within the team there would be no place for excuses. The serious thing was not just that Ferrari pointed to his pilot. The worrying thing was that he did not offer a complete explanation to the public or firm support before the media. The narrative was floating. Hamilton, one of the best pilots in history, was making mistakes. And I was doing it in a car that, according to Ferrari, had been developed partly under his vision and experience. This generated a short circuit in the integration narrative. The SF25 was presented as an adapted car for Lewis, But the reality showed a car that did not respond to its driving style or the dynamic demands of the most demanding circuits. To make things worse, Ferrari had arrived at Spa with his most ambitious update package of the whole season. In the center of that package was the total revision of the rear suspension system. Anti-squat geometry was completely redesigned, lowering about 30 mm the position of the upper wishbone front. This modification, on paper, should correct the car trend to destabilize in aggressive braking and improve traction at the exit of slow curves. It was a structural, non-cosmetic update and had generated great internal expectations. It was Ferrari's strong letter to start cutting distances with McLaren and Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton perceived him from the steering wheel. The car became unpredictable, especially in critical phases such as the transition from throttle to acceleration. Trust, that intangible but essential element for any Formula One pilot, evaporated. And when a pilot loses confidence, errors multiply, doubts increase, and tension with engineers scale quickly. The most worrying thing about all this context is that Ferrari was not showing signs of having control of the situation. Decision-making was fragmented. Some engineers proposed to return to the previous configuration, while others opted to continue developing the new suspension despite the initial negative results. Hamilton, in the midst of this scattered technical environment, began to give clear signs of frustration. Radio communication became more tense. Simulator sessions did not generate significant advances. And the Italian press, always demanding, began to suggest that the relationship between Ferrari and its new star signing was far from being the perfect union that had been sold. This second act is not just the continuation of a bad weekend. It is the portrait of a team that has lost control of its technical narrative, its internal cohesion, and, above all, its bad pilot. Hamilton arrived to change Ferrari's recent history, but what he found was a structure still divided between tradition and innovation, between the desire to win and the inability to execute. The elimination of a quick lap for exceeding the track limits may seem a minor fact in the context of a season as long and complex as Formula One. But in the case of Lewis Hamilton in the 2025 Belgian GP, that moment defined much more than a grid position. It marked a symbolic and operational breakdown within Ferrari, one that revealed deep structural weaknesses and questioned the viability of the most ambitious project of the modern era in Maranello. The error in Rai Dillon undressed a reality. Ferrari does not have a structure capable of protecting or enhancing a world champion like Hamilton. And this has consequences beyond the result in Belgium. This incident weakened the internal morale of the team, reinforced the doubts of the media about the leadership of Frédéric Vasseur, and placed Hamilton in an unexpected position, that of a pilot who, just in his second month with Ferrari, already seems more an external element than a pillar of the project. At the championship level, the involvement was immediate. Hamilton, who had been trying to add solid points after a difficult adaptation, was left without real recovery options. In a calendar as tight as that of 2025, each error is magnified. And in a championship in which McLaren and Mercedes show consistency and tactical aggressiveness, losing points on a track that historically favors Ferrari was more than a wasted opportunity. It was an advantage assigned to its direct rivals. But there is a second level of involvement, deeper and more dangerous, the psychological. For Hamilton, this situation represents a frontal shock between expectation and reality. He did not reach Ferrari by nostalgia. He arrived to win. To demonstrate that he can still be champion with another team, in another culture, in another environment. The problem is that this heroic narrative clashes against a structure that is still trying to define itself, which does not have the operational maturity of Mercedes, nor the technical aggressiveness of McLaren, nor the internal solidity of Red Bull. The risk is that Hamilton, not feeling backed, begins to retreat emotionally and professionally. The most serious of this episode is not what happened on the track, but what symbolized outside it. Because if a team like Ferrari cannot protect your star pilot from a millimeter error, if you cannot react quickly, technical explanations or real-time solutions, then what is at stake is not an isolated result. It is the credibility of the entire project. And when a pilot like Lewis Hamilton begins to lose faith in the project, the rest of the grill perceives it. The media amplify it. The rivals exploit it. The engineers feel it. And sponsors take it into account. This was not a simple round. It was a warning signal. A reflection of a team that is not yet ready to sustain the weight of its own promises. But the message they are transmitting now, with unenforced errors, lack of technical direction and questionable decisions, is a very different one. Therefore, the true unknown that arises is not whether Hamilton can overcome this error, but if Ferrari is up to the challenge that represents having him in his ranks. Because recent history has shown that it is not enough to have the best pilot, if you do not have a team that is willing to evolve with it, support it in each decision and build a structure that allows sustained success. So now the question is no longer whether Hamilton will adapt to Ferrari. It is if Ferrari will survive Hamilton. Are we witnessing the principle of inglorious era or the first bars of a historical disappointment?